Start right by seeing the best way to load the quilt on the machine. Richard Larson is here to share his tips on thread painting before you start quilting. And we'll discuss offering basting as a service for hand quilters. So stay tuned. Linda's Longarm Quilting is aired free to you by Gamble Quilting Systems Vision 2. Innovation taken to the next level. My stitch, my vision, my Gamble. Now, you don't usually think of professional machine quilters being able to do much for hand quilters. But there's one area where machine quilting is appreciated universally: basting. This is a wonderful service to offer because it lets you secure the top, batting, and backing together so that the hand quilter can spend time concentrating on the detailed quilting work. When you're basting, use the channel lock so your stitches are straight. The stitches should be 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch long, no shorter. Every 4 inches horizontally across the quilt is enough for any hand quilter. Don't sew over the pictures or delicate applique. Skip over those parts. Use cotton thread and a small size needle. A 3 MR needle or a 14 is sufficient. Warn quilt owners to remove machine-basted stitches carefully. They are stronger than hand-basted stitches. Hand quilters can be some of your best customers. They piece a lot of quilts, and they will want you to quilt some of the ones they don't have time to hand quilt. Loading the quilt properly on the quilting machine is very important, and it has to be done very efficiently. I have loaded the quilt so many ways and timed it and just all different ways I could think of to see which was the most efficient and the best way to set the quilt up. So I want to show you what I've come up with. First of all, on the back of the table, it's really important to lay out the quilt. And you've already measured the quilt when the quilt came in with your customer. So I lay it out and I make the edges even here on the fold, and make sure that I have plenty of extra lining, and I see and check how much extra lining I have on the sides of the quilt. And then I'm going to put a pin in the centers of the lining and the top, so I won't have to do that again. And I want to make sure that I weave these pins in very carefully. I don't want these pins to fall out, because during the loading process this could get this top and this lining is going to be shook out over the quilting machine. I don't want those to fall out. Then I will take my top and lay it over the machine like this. Now it's right side up, like that. If this was a big quilt, most of it would be hanging over the back of the table. I'm going to let the table handle the bulk of the quilt. As I walk around the side, I will let one of the rollers down to the floor and let the lining roller down to the floor as well. Then I will bring up the top like this, find my center mark, match my mark, and start my pinning process using that center pin at first. Now I'm going to baste, I call this pin basting, about every 4 to 5 inches as I apply this top. And this top is, you don't have to really measure this top. Just pin it on, because when you get down to the end of the top, whether you're doing a pantograph or custom quilting, you will be able to unpin that top. Now as I work my way back to the center, I am filling in these pins right along the edge, not taking more than 1/4 inch bite with that pin. And I also want to make sure that I see a little bit of top coming over the edge. Now I have a zipper on this one, but if it's just canvas edge, it'd be the canvas edge. If it's a zipper, it's right along the edge of the zipper. So anyway, you're doing that, and you just continue to pin so that that top is solid. Now if you don't pin solid, you will get gaps in when you tighten this up. And for instance, if you had a stripe and you put any pull on that stripe, you'll see that stripe will go up just like that. And it won't be solid where you've got your solid pins. And if it's pinned on that way, you can actually quilt that distortion right into your quilt. So we will continue to baste out to the side here, and the reason that I baste rather than pin close when I'm starting is that if I pin close, I tend to stretch that top a little bit too much. So by just basting out 4 to 5 inches and then going back and filling in, I keep a nice even pull all the way across. And the other tip there is to use something that's very handy. As you can see, I have a nice big pin cushion that I made that's stuffed with wool to keep those pins sharp, and it holds enough pins for a king-size bedspread. So it's very handy. You should never be reaching across or following or chasing a pin cushion around. Now that I have that on, I can go ahead and roll the top, and I'm going to roll it just until it falls off of the top roller up there, the pickup roller. Then I'm going to flip it down and just get it out of the way. Then I will take my lining and lay it over the quilting machine in the very same manner, except, as you notice, this is with the wrong side up instead of, just like you lay it on the bed. So the right side goes down and it's wrong side up. And again, if this is a big size quilt, most of this will be hanging over. And you can see this roller is going to help us as we roll it so that we don't get any wrinkles as we roll it up on the roller. So I can come over on this side, reach down here and grab my lining roller and bring it up and over. And if that canvas tends to fall off, you can always take a clamp like that and just clamp one end of that canvas to hold it there for you in place while you are doing your pinning. Now this pinning is going to be exactly the same as the top. In fact, this is just as important, if not more, because when we are doing a custom quilt, for the most part, we will be on the lining roller and the pickup roller, and the top roller, after we get the quilt stabilized, will be completely unused. Now there's my lining all pinned on, and I'll release this clamp. Now this one I'm just going to roll until I have a nice lead on the other side, so it comes down to it just touches the table over here on this side, because I want to be able to reach it very easily. And I can let this canvas down, and at this point you can either add your batting or you can put your batting on after. You don't have to put your batting on at this point, but I like to put my batting on because like I said, I want to be efficient, and I found that if I have my batting pinned on the same time I do my lining, then I've eliminated a step already. So I put these two together. Here's my batting and my lining, and I bring them up to my center point, and again I put the pins on the canvas side, and I'll come across here like this, pinning the lining and batting on, just doing the basting, and then I'll come back and pin close, just like I did on the top and on the lining. Okay, there's our lining and batting. Now we're going to roll up our lining like this, and we want to get it down close to us. This is one of the biggest mistakes I see when students are loading a quilt, is that they have this so far away from them, clear over here, and they're reaching over like that. If you're going to do this for a long time, and I want to do it till I die, so I have to take good care of my back. So let's bring things nice and close to us. Let's not be so far away. Now we're going to run a reference line across here, and I'm going to come down because this is going to allow me to have extra lining and batting all the way around the quilt. So when I go to bind the quilt, I'll have plenty of room there to square it up and see what I want to do with that. So I'm going to go down about 1.5 inches, 2 inches, whatever you have there. If you don't have a lot of lining, then you'll have to stay a little closer. Putting on my horizontal channel lock, and then I'm going to run across, and this could be basting stitch if you wanted it to. I'm going to run across the quilt like this, and there is my reference line. Now that's my line so that I can actually bring my top up to that line. And if my quilt wasn't square, or if it had an odd shape at the top, then here's where I can make an adjustment. And I can see that this top is not completely square, So I will make an adjustment. It won't all come up to that line because there's a little bit uneven part right here, but I'll start on the line down here. Now you can square up your linings of the folks who bring you quilt tops or your own tops, but you can't cut anybody's borders off and you can't square up their tops if they're not square. You just have to deal with it, and here is the point where you deal with that. If you can see that it's dog-eared, and dog-eared means that it has too much fullness in the borders, and so it just like comes up, instead of being perpendicular like this, it pushes up like this, and you can just lay that dog-ear right up above that line if you need to. So that's an important step there in setting up your quilt for you. Now I'm going to take off the channel lock, and I'm going to come back over here, and this time I'm going to sew just about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And you could do a lot of pinning here if you're afraid this is going to slip. See, I'm pretty experienced about this, so my left hand really helps hold all of this in place. But you can do a lot of pinning, and when you do that pinning, make sure that you keep the pin out of the way of where you're going to be stitching, because you're going to be stitching right on the very edge of the fabric. And if you get, like right here, I'm getting a little fabric ahead of where I'm stitching. And if that happens, sometimes I'll just go off like that and come back onto another area, because you don't have to do every single little bit. And so if it starts getting ahead of you, then just stop and go off and come back on another area. You don't have to always deal with the problem when it's there. You can just save it for a later date. We'll go across like that, staying right on the edge of our line. And if you get off like that and you're not on very far, you can go back and get back on, because this is all out here in the batting, and so it's not on the quilt at all. You don't have to worry about that for a minute. Okay, now we have that line stitched across the top there, and we're going to move this quilt back up in position like this, and I want to roll it up to about a hand width away from the pickup roller, like that, and tighten up the lining. And at this point, I can come over here and make sure everything is nice and straight. Look underneath, make sure the batting's straight. The top is all smoothed out like that. And then I can tighten up the top as well. I'm going to sew down this left side, and I do this on a custom quilt or a pantograph or whatever it is. I sew all the way down to the edge as far as I can go. Now I don't continue to roll the quilt and continue that line until I roll. So you don't just keep rolling and stitching that side. Now generally for custom quilts, I will just put my pins like this every 3 to 4 inches to hold this before I put the clamps on. Notice I don't have any clamps on until I've pinned and stitched this. If you put a clamp on and then pin, it's totally different. When you release the clamp, you've got a bubble. So you want to be very careful there. On this side, I'm going to, because I'm doing a pantograph here, I'm just going to come down this side and just baste every so often, like this. Just take some long stitches along the side, and that helps me because when you're doing a pantograph and you get over to the side, you don't want to have to worry about hitting pins. But as we work this direction, if I stitch this with a good stitch, I would end up with a bubble. I'd have to take that out. So by using that nice long stitch, I can secure that, but if I need to take it out, it's going to be really easy to take out. So then I put my clamps on the sides. Make sure you get your clamps on good. If you distort them at all when you put your clamps on, if you can see any distortion like that, do you see how that's being pulled there? You can even feel it if you go like that. That's too much. Release it. But you only have to clamp because now this is part of your lining and batting. You really only have to clamp over to the edge here. So that keeps your clamps out of the way as you're stitching as well. So we'll get our clamps on, and then we're ready to stitch our pantograph. So we go to the back of the machine. The pantograph pattern normally goes underneath the plastic, and then I use tape. But in this case, because you won't be able to see the laser light very well, I'm going to just lay it on top of the plastic, and you make sure you line it up with the lines on your table. I have lines underneath here on my table, and so I line it up like that. I move my machine over to the bottom right-hand corner like this. And I generally put my needle down, and then I'll turn on my laser light like that. And I will focus my laser light down to the bottom of the pattern. And so that's going to be very important. Then I tighten that very nicely, make sure that's not going to move on me. And right outside of the quilt, right on the very edge, or even outside the quilt, I can take several lines or stitches here so that to secure the stitches, and then I'll be ready to stitch and just get stitching here with our pantograph. Next time on Linda's Longarm Quilting, we look at and work on antique quilts. Marcia Stevens shows us a great way to use our pantograph and roll patterns on quilt borders. And we see how to streamline quilting by loading and working on more than one quilt at a time. Remember, if I can do it, you can do it. See you next time. I'm having so much fun with my new Gamble Vision 2. I have customized my right handle to the start and stop, and my tie-off feature as well. My left handle has not only the needle position, so I can have my needle start and stop down, but also my stitch button, which toggles between stitch modes. This just keeps getting better and better as I envision more possibilities in my quilting applications. Being able to customize the 4 buttons on the handles has given my creativity wings. My stitch, my vision, my Gamble.